Welcome to the Sanity Project podcast, where you can awaken your mind to clarity and success even in today's life challenges. We're here to provide insights and solutions that will help you live a sane, healthy, and prosperous life. Here's your host, Joanne Victoria.
Hello, everybody. You are here to discover a life of clarity, confidence, sanity, and entrepreneurial success. Welcome to the Sanity Project podcast. Our guest today is Jason Cercone. Jason is, he's about podcasts. He's a creator, podcaster, and brand builder who helps entrepreneurs, leaders, and professionals maximize the brand building power of the podcast medium to establish authority and accelerate growth. He's also the host of Evolution of Brand, a podcast featuring self-defined entrepreneurs and professionals sharing inspirational stories and tactical brand building strategies. Too many S's, Jason. Welcome to
Didn't even realize that.
Yeah, I've got welcome to the show, Jason Cercone.
Joanne, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, it's delightful to have you here, a podcast professional. What makes you a podcast professional, Jason?
Well, I've been doing this for nearly a decade now, and when I dove into it full time, I wanted to go more beyond just being a podcaster. Of course, this is a big part of my life. I love being behind the microphone. I love having these impactful conversations, and I've taken it to another degree because I help others do the same. Because there's so much power built within this medium that if you truly understand the strategy that goes into excelling, and you're willing to master the fundamentals and get really good at your craft, whether you're a host or a guest or you're a hybrid of both, you can really captivate people and welcome them into your world and accomplish a lot of goals that you have set for yourself using this medium as a vehicle to get you to that finish line. So the fact that I've been able to parlay this into a career, that's what I feel has made me a professional. And on top of that, not even thinking of it from a career standpoint, I've dedicated myself to getting a little bit better each and every time I get on the microphone. So whether I'm recording an episode of my own show or I'm collaborating with someone like yourself, Joanne, to create great content for your audience, I'm always focused on how I can be the best possible resource for you or for the audience that's listening. And ultimately, for me, that commitment is a very professional step towards utilizing podcasts to the fullest extent.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I try to keep moving forward all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's really, in fact, I was looking at changing my focus on my podcast. Don't anybody freak out, whoever's listening. You won't even notice it. Let's just say that. You won't even notice it. But just to decide, who to talk to, who to listen to. So many of my recordings, appointments were made when Podmatch came out. And I, of course, saw that and went wild and, signed up half the playlist. But that's almost done. And I'm looking at what kind of people do I want? What kind of people do my listeners want? What do they want to learn? What do they want to learn more of? What do they want to learn about right now?
Yeah.
So this is what you can do.
There's so much to it. And it's funny, I'm in that same boat as in regards to transitioning with podcasts. When I first jumped into the world full time, I had started a podcast, and the podcasting world, I should say, the real world, regular world. That was a long time ago.
Ago.
With podcasting, I had a show called Pod Theory, and that was the first one. I knew when I was doing this, I'm going to do 2 shows. And Pod Theory was a daily show that was just like 5 to 10 minutes, and it was quick tips and strategies for podcasters to learn how to be a better podcaster. And then Evolution of Brand was about roughly a year later that I launched that, and I immediately realized it was going to be tough to manage 2 podcasts. So I decided to pull back on Pod Theory and put my dedication on Evolution of Brand. Now, as we move forward, Evolution of Brand, I've decided that, I made a transition there. I went to just personal branding, but then I went a little deeper and realized that I'm all about podcasting, and my big focus is helping people maximize their guest appearances, And I also work with podcasters so they understand how to treat their guests and get the most value from their guests. So I decided that this brand of podcast guesting simplified that I've been running with needs to be a podcast as well. So now Evolution of Brand is on hiatus, and Podcast Guesting Simplified is the show that I'm running with. And I'm featuring stories from different people that have leveraged podcast guesting and also other podcast professionals that are either coaching or training or helping people get booked. I welcome all insights and all aspects of this amazing approach to building your brand. And that podcast, to me, the Podcast Guesting Simplified, as things have come full circle, it spoke much more to my overall brand message than Evolution of Brand did. So it was an incredibly difficult decision to put that show on hiatus. And I'm not saying it's gone forever, but I had poured so much effort and time into building that show, and it was really going well. But when I evaluated it with that wide lens and zoomed out a bit, I realized that I needed to make a couple changes so the message I was putting out there did speak more clearly to my overall brand. That's why the change took place. So in the space, there is a lot of room for pivoting and making changes. And once you determine where you want your message to be directed, you can really make some tremendous strides.
I'd be curious to know how you're doing that, because I say that I'm looking to expand and contract at the same time, pull back and look at my own podcast and how I can make it better, of course, but the better usually is down to me to do that. I can't expect the guests to be better, unless I, if I'm critical about who I'm choosing, that's important too.
Absolutely. I mean, and you can have expectations for your guest as well. And there is nothing wrong with laying out what you're demanding of them on the front end. So if you want them to have a microphone, you want them to have headphones, so you're creating the best quality product when it's all said and done, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having that as a requirement. So on the host end, a lot of it comes down to respect, and that respect is a two-way street. I've had this conversation often. If you're a guest, you need to understand what that podcaster is looking to create. And what they're not looking to create is a stage for you to come and sell on for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or whatever the length of the podcast is. And so many aspiring guests make that mistake where they think they need to show up and go into sales mode because they only have this real limited window to make this impression that's going to make people buy. And that's not the point. And if you're going into podcast interviews with that mindset, more than likely you're either A, going to piss off the audience if they hear it, or B, you're going to piss off the host to where they don't air your episode because they know their audience doesn't want to hear an infomercial. So you make much better strides by showing up and bringing value to that podcast, because that's what that podcaster is looking for. That's why they said, yeah, it makes sense to bring you on. I want to collaborate with you. It looks like you know your stuff. So you can have a great conversation, and you can let your value be the sales pitch, because what will happen is your value is going to resonate with the right people in the audience. When they hear that message and follow your call to action, they're going to come into your world, and now you can provide value to them on multiple levels. And the podcast host is going to endorse you as well, because you help them create content that helps them grow their show. So that's a big part of it. And understanding that the podcaster is looking to build something truly special for their audience so they can continue to get listeners, that helps you root yourself in value. As the host, you have to understand that your guest also has expectations and things they want to accomplish. So you need to give them the best possible conversation you can. And that starts with creating compelling content by going a little deeper. Don't ask surface level questions. Really dig into what this guest's expertise is all about. So that creates the best organic conversation. When people hear it, they really, wow, this is fantastic information. Not only do they follow the guest, but now they think this show is all about bringing value to me. What else have I missed? I'm going to go back and listen in the catalog, check out some past episodes, and I'm going to subscribe so I don't miss future episodes. When you work that way, everybody wins. So both sides have to be thinking collaboratively from step one. So this great content comes together and more incredible podcasts come to life.
Well, you just said it, and I hope our listeners are paying attention, because what Jason is talking about is what we really need to do. And those of us who aren't doing it, and I don't do it all the time. I have a question here from one of my former, I am one of the people who saves things. I save paper. So this is dated February 5th, 2019,
Oh boy.
when I was a guest on a particular show. And one of his pre-show questions is what? What are you working on right now that's got you really excited? Lightly pitch your new book, program, workshop, webinar, product, event, etc. Lightly pitch. He's not into, a heavy, let's talk about the book. And I know that I've had a couple of guests who wanted to talk about what they did and what their focus is. And that's what they want to do. And I try hard to divert and ask other questions, but sometimes you just can't do that.
Yeah, it's sometimes when somebody is stuck in that sales mode, it's hard to get them to break out of it. And I've encountered that a couple times. I'm sure all podcasters at some time, depending on the structure and the format of their podcast, they've probably experienced the same thing. And that's where I feel that training programs and education that I'm putting into the world is to help eradicate that. I really want guests to understand that they can benefit much more from bringing value and good stories and providing insights in that half hour, 45-minute window that they're a guest versus just trying to sell. There are a lot of authors that always want to just refer back to the book. The host asks them a question and the answer always starts with, well, as I talked about in chapter 13 of my book.
Right.
And that can get painful. And the grand scheme of things, when I look at podcast guesting, I've always looked at it as the trailer to a movie. When you go to the movies, you're treated to all of these trailers before the actual show that you came for comes on the screen. Those trailers are 2-3 minutes of scenes. They're designed to get you excited. So you say, ooh, that looks great. It comes out next month. I'm going to come back and watch that. Your podcast guest appearance is the same thing. You're not giving everybody the full movie. You want to give them some insight, and you want to get them excited about who you are and how you can help them get the transformation that they seek. If they resonate with your message, they can now say, where do I go next? How do I see the full movie? They go to your website. They follow you on social media. They follow your call to action that you leave on that podcast. And now they're in front of the big screen getting all this additional value from you. And that's where you could potentially close a sale. And just like anything else, not everybody is in impulse buying mode right now on the spot. Many people will take years to make a buying decision.
Absolutely.
And some people a little quicker than that, but it's all about bringing value consistently. So when they are ready to make a decision, you're front of mind. And the guest interview and all these guest appearances that you make can put you in a position to get people into your world so you can bring that value to them all the time.
So what do you think needs to be done to make the hosts and the guests pay attention to that?
On the front end, I think communication has to be on point. And it starts with the very first correspondence, whether it's the host reaching out to somebody saying, hey, I'd like to have you on my show, or it's the guest sending a presentation or a pitch to be on that show as a guest. They have to be rooted in value from the start. And like I said, having that mutual understanding for what each wants to accomplish, for the most part, that can be pretty standard across the board. But having a 15-minute conversation beforehand, even whether you do it right before the interview or you schedule a pre-call in advance or prior to the actual recording session, you can learn so much about what somebody wants to accomplish. At the same time, if you don't want to go the route of being on a call, you can have an intake form. Joanne, I know when I signed up to be a guest on your show, I had to answer some questions, and that helps you understand a little bit more about me and what I'm all about. Don't skimp on this if you're a guest. If a podcaster asks you some questions that will help them cater to your expertise and build a show format that makes you look like a rock star, don't give them a surface level two-word answer. Something I've seen a couple times where it just makes it harder for me to get a full understanding of what you want to accomplish. So these little steps in the beginning before the interview ever takes place, it begins what should become a very powerful relationship. And that's an aspect of this that many people overlook. When you are coming together to create this content, it's not just about the content itself. It's about sparking a relationship that could lead to a number of opportunities. You don't know what those might be, but perhaps you have a service that the host needs. You're coming on as a guest, and the host needs what you have. You may have a client right there on the spot. Maybe they work with a few people and they say, you know what? I've been talking with some of my clients and they were saying that they need something like you sell. Would you mind if I introduce you? What are you going to say? No, of course not. That's why you're here, because you're looking to build these relationships that ultimately lead to more people coming into your world. But if you show up with a transactional mindset, and this goes, again, both ways, host and guest, if you're only thinking about this one-time transaction of creating a podcast interview, you miss out on all of the built-in benefits that are way better. Because again, obviously we want to create great content for the audience, but it's all about building relationships. And you have this wonderful opportunity sitting right in front of you to get that started. So thinking on that level at the very beginning, this is how hosts and guests can start working together even before they connect, even before the microphones get hot. This will help them get some chemistry in place that allows a very powerful conversation to break out. That can lead to, again, a number of different things. And if it leads to potential business on the spot, maybe with other people in their circle, or just a phenomenal podcast episode when it goes live, everybody wins when you have that abundance mindset and you're thinking about the long-term value that this process can deliver.
Yeah, I find myself with my many brains inside my brain thinking of how can I connect this person and with whom while I'm interviewing the guest. And I wind up sending them emails after. Joe and Mary, meet. You must meet. You must create a relationship. You can talk about X, Y, and Z, whatever I put in the email. Now, I don't follow up to see what happens with these people because right now it's not a time in my life for me to do that. But I hope that they are successful because I see that possibility there. Mm-hmm. And not everybody does that. And not everybody does it for me either.
No, and that's a common gripe that I hear from podcasters, and it's a legitimate gripe, is that guests don't do anything to share an episode once it goes live. And I get it. I've experienced this, obviously. Again, I don't think there's a podcast that hasn't experienced this. You think that you've got something that's really, really good, and you send all these assets to the host or to the guest that you had, and you're hoping they're going to get behind it as much as you, but they don't. In fact, a lot of times it's radio silence.
Yeah.
And you wonder, well, what's going on here? And again, as I talk to so many podcasters, I can't believe they didn't share this episode. And the first question I ask is, when is the last time you spoke to that person? And probably more times than not, the answer is, well, we recorded 3 months ago, and I guess I haven't really talked to him since then. It's like, exactly. They've moved on.
Right.
They're doing other things, and they've probably done multiple interviews, whether it's video, podcast, combination of both, whatever. They've got other things on their plate than your podcast. So maybe they just forgot, and they just, and that excitement clearly has waned in that period of time because there's been no communication after the fact. So it's up to you as the podcaster and even as the guest, if you really want to treat this approach with the respect that the respect it deserves and the benefits it can bring you. It's up to you to keep the conversation going after the interview ends. So as for my show, what I do is I send out a couple emails after the fact, one asking for a review. And that's something, all guests, I feel that should be boilerplate. When you get done, go leave them a nice review. That helps the podcast it helps the discoverability. And you want more people listening to that show so they hear your episode when it goes live. But that's a story for another day. Getting people to leave reviews is probably one of the hardest things to do, but it is what it is. But then I give a quick survey as well. Hey, tell me how I'm doing. I want to make sure that I'm bringing the best possible podcast product to life. I've got 3 questions I'd like you to answer. It's going to help me get better. And then I send a third email that says, let's talk about, let's get together and talk without the task of having to record a podcast interview. I call it a meeting of minds, and we can plot world domination, or, if you want to do something with a little less overhead, let's get together and talk about some things and see if there's mutual opportunities to work with one another. And not everybody is going to follow up and say, oh yeah, let's do that. But some people will. And that's how then you can come into a very laid back conversation and get to know somebody a little bit better. So you have to take those steps to continuing to build a relationship. Because if you just come at it with, we're going to interview today, and then in 3 months it's going to go live. For one, that's transactional. And two, that guest very likely is not going to be as excited as you are, and therefore may not share that content. So it's a way to nip it in the bud. But ultimately, it's all about creating this collaborative atmosphere where you're not just creating podcast content, but you're creating relationships that could lead to limitless opportunities.
From your mouth to everybody's ears. So if this is what you're going to be doing in the future, I would suggest that you maintain that and do that, because I think this is important. The information you're giving to everyone is vital because they have to hear it over and over and over and over again.
I agree.
And, not everybody can, I keep thinking the Joe Rogan thing, he talks to people, 2-3 hours. Well, that sort of changes the dynamic of the host and the guest, because when you're talking for that length of time, you're able to have a different conversation. I don't go over 25 minutes. Whoever's listening, you must figure this out by now. And, that's what I do. I say it. In fact, I say sometimes I want to go less than that, as long as the message is out there from the guest. But sure. I think when you have the opportunity to speak more with a guest, you tend to get deeper and deeper and deeper. So from that regard, I'm not getting paid the money he's getting paid, but that's a consideration. But from that regard, he's doing a great job getting the relationship going. If he doesn't know the person already, sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. Right. But I think that that's really important, that he has these length of time, 2-3 hours, whatever he wants, to record someone and listen to them. So he just goes off on his own experiences, and continues the conversation.
Right.
Do you feel that way?
Oh, 100%. And that's the thing too. It's very commendable that you have that structure and you stick to it, because what that does is it brings consistency to a listener's world. And they now know when new episodes go live, it's half an hour. I can listen to this and get a full episode in on my way to work, if that's the length of my commute. So when people start to plan these podcasts into their life, the more they get invested in them, the more consistency, the better. Because if you've got one episode that's 25 minutes and the next one's 2 hours and the next one comes in around like an hour, and then you get another that's 15 minutes, it's hard to get a gauge of, well, when can I make sure that every week I can listen to the Sanity Project and get it in a very tight window? Because we all have lives outside of podcasts, obviously. And no, we don't. I shouldn't say that, right? Doing what I do. But I like other things too. But the point is, if you have a structure, if you have a format that works for you and you're comfortable with it, and most importantly, your audience digs it, they like what they're hearing. I feel the sweet spot for podcasts is about half an hour in that time frame. And with Evolution of Brand, I was going longer than that. And that was when I did the first year evaluation. I said, you know what? I think it's time to start cutting these episodes down in length and getting into that half hour part. And because I just personally, from a production standpoint, there's less to edit. And it is more of a digestible, I can get it all in one shot if I have a half hour commute type of thing. So
right.
Again, but there's no set rules on this. It really depends on what kind of time you have. And if you have a few hours that you want to dedicate to creating podcast content and you can create it and then release it with consistency, by all means, do what works for you. But that consistency piece is a tremendous element here in podcasting, hosting and guesting.
I appreciate that, because I totally believe that. And I don't like when I see, not that I'm, the guardian of this, but I don't like when I see, 1 week it's 15 minutes, the next week's an hour and 15 minutes. Right. I mean, I don't spend too much time with what other people are doing anymore, about podcasts because I've got my system down and that works for me. You know, a few variations here and there, like we discussed before the show. And yes, we did, people. We talked about you. Anyway,
mainly talked about how you pronounce my last name, but that's another
we did. And you didn't want to disappoint your father. So, we move forward and you've got to have a system. It's your system. So if you're looking to start a podcast, it's your system. You could do what you want to do. Mm-hmm. And people don't get that. They don't, they just don't get that they are in charge. I remember when I did my first 10 podcasts to get them up and going, per the instructions from Apple, the God. I did my 10 and then, I had taken a course, done all the whatever pre-work, but you have to get there and do it. So when I was doing one, hosting a podcast with someone that I sort of knew, and I was mumbling and I wasn't, I didn't have a stroke or anything. I was just screwed up. And she said, "Do you want me to take over?" And I says, "Oh God, yes." So she took over. And I've never listened to it again. I don't know what she said. I don't know what was going on. So she stepped in, but since she was also a podcast host, she was able to step in and balance the host guest thing. And she saved my life. I would have quit out of embarrassment.
And I'll tell you what, Joanne, I mean, it's another thing to commend you on is that you kept going. Many people would have done exactly that. They would have said, "Oh my God, this is not for me. I cannot do this." And they would have walked away far too soon. And that's one of the very hard things to get a hold of in the very beginning, especially if you've never done this, is it's going to take some time to get better. It's just like anything else. And sometimes some podcasters just can't commit to learning those fundamentals and getting comfortable with having these conversations on the microphone to where it is more natural and free flowing. And it's one of those things. You don't have to be a natural conversationalist to make that happen, but you do have to commit to getting better and practicing and really being devoted to your craft. That is what makes a good podcast. And more important, a self-sustaining long-term podcast, because the numbers are scary. The numbers say, like, I think what is the last statistic I read? Like 90% of podcasts don't get beyond 3 episodes, something to that effect. Mm-hmm. I've read others that said like the average podcast gets to about 7 or 8 episodes and then it goes away. And there are a number of factors in play. One of the big ones I feel is that people don't realize the work that's involved with doing a podcast, which is why, especially to anybody that's brand new to the platform, start with guesting. It's always the advice I give.
Yes, people tell me, "I'm going to start my own podcast." I said, I suggest you go as a guest first.
Yep. Get comfortable with your voice, your story, get some confidence, discover how the medium works. As a guest, you can learn what the podcaster's plight is. And then down the road, you can reevaluate and say, okay, maybe guesting is all I need, or I do want to start my own show. And when you do start your show, now you have a foundation on which to build upon, and you have a network of people that you've collaborated with, so you can reach out to them and say, "Hey, I'm starting a show. Would you like to be a guest?" That's typically the hardest part about the beginning of a podcast, is finding guests. So if you've taken time to build a network by being a guest, you nip that problem in the bud before it even becomes a problem. So yeah, I agree with you there. Start with guesting.
You've been listening to Jason Cercone, not Cercone as Joanne wanted to say, but Cercone, JASONCERCONE. And if you go to his website, you will find all sorts of things to get interested in. And I think he might have a masterclass. And what have you got on your website? Because we had a conversation before and I don't know exactly what's there.
All kinds of things. I've got some free resources to take advantage of. I've also got a course called the 5-Star Guest Pitch, and that is teaching you one of the most critical elements of podcast guesting. And it's something that I wanted to address and have a complete course dedicated. And it's a mini course. It's a little over an hour with all the information that you need to create a pitch or presentation, as I would rather call it, that gets you booked on more podcasts. Joanne, I asked you the question before we started, and I ask every podcaster that I collaborate with, how are the presentations and the pitches that you get? Are they good or bad? And the majority of them are not good. And
well, I'm going to interrupt again, but I feel as though sometimes you get it from their advertising company. They're sending a pitch, and it's like a page and a half. I don't want to read a page and a half.
Right. Now, there is some very easy fundamentals, and it's not as listen, I'm all about Guesting Simplified. I'm all about podcasting simplified. So this course of course speaks to that, making this the easiest possible process. But this is where so many aspiring guests miss opportunities, because if they can't get past the presentation phase, they don't get to the actual interview where they can make the real impact and start building that relationship. So mastering this fundamental first step is incredibly important. If you really want to excel at this, check out my course. I guarantee it's going to help you get pointed in the right direction. You can find that on my website too.
And I also want to remind my listeners, as I do on every podcast, is to listen to this podcast again with your yellow pad and your pen. I know the pen is archaic and so is a yellow pad, but you get more information from your head to your brain by writing it. So listen to the podcast again. Take notes, because there's no way that you could remember everything that Jason Cercone said today. And I want to thank Jason Cercone for being here, because this has been an uplift for me and got me thinking. And I appreciate you being here, Jason. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate the opportunity to connect with you and your great audience today.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sanity Project podcast. Please go to AskJoanneVictoria.com to listen to more podcasts. Check out Joanne's coaching programs and get a free copy of her report, 5 Steps to Achieve Life-Work Harmony. That's AskJoanneVictoria.com. Take care, and thanks for being here.